I never thought a tree could turn my peaceful neighborhood upside down, until the HOA Karen appeared at my door, storming like a hurricane, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. The sun had barely risen, casting soft golden light over my backyard, when I saw her approaching, heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. I had always loved this tree, a massive oak that had grown alongside my childhood memories. Its branches stretched toward the sky, leaves whispering in the morning breeze. But today, it had apparently become a threat, according to her. Karen's lips curled into a tight, disapproving line as she waved the HOA notice in front of me. "This tree is illegal. It's obstructing the property line. You have 24 hours to remove it, or we're taking further action," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, practiced in intimidation. I tried to stay calm, knowing how these types operate, power trips disguised as rules. I explained politely that the tree had been here for decades, that it was on my property, and that I had documentation proving it. But she didn't care. "Rules are rules," she said. "And I make sure they're enforced." The threat of fines, legal actions, and complaints seemed endless. As I looked past her, I saw my neighbors peeking through their windows, curious, whispering, worried. Then came the twist. She had already called the cops, saying there was illegal obstruction and violation of HOA rules. My heart sank. I knew the officers would show up, and they would expect me to comply. But I had a secret, a legal leverage she didn't suspect. I owned not just my lot, but the land under the house she had built years ago. She thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea the game was about to change. As I watched her storm off to make her call, I could feel my pulse racing. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. It was about pride, justice, and exposing a woman who thrived on controlling other people's lives. And when the cops arrived, they would witness the truth that Karen had tried to bury for years. The sun climbed higher, painting long shadows across the street. I was in the backyard, examining the oak, when the familiar wail of sirens reached my ears. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The officers stepped out, badges gleaming, notebooks ready. Karen had rehearsed this moment. She waved them over, pointing at me with a smug expression. "He's defying HOA rules. I demand action," she insisted, her voice dripping with authority. I could see the surprise in the officers' eyes as they tried to process what seemed like a minor neighborhood dispute blown out of proportion. I greeted them calmly, showing all my documents, deeds, land maps, property records. The officers listened politely, eyebrows raised at the meticulous paperwork. Karen huffed impatiently beside them, clearly frustrated that the scene wasn't unfolding as she imagined. Then I dropped the bomb. I casually mentioned, "By the way, this land extends under your house, and technically, I own it too." There was a silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. The officers exchanged glances, flipping through records, realizing that Karen had overstepped in ways she never anticipated. Her face turned pale. She tried to argue, but her words faltered when the legal truth hit her. I could almost see her inner panic as she realized that the power she wielded with the HOA was meaningless in the face of actual ownership. My pulse raced, not out of fear, but excitement. The scales were finally tipping. The cops, professional and calm, explained that HOA regulations don't override property law and that any further threats or false claims could be considered harassment. Karen tried to salvage some control, but the officers left politely, shaking their heads, while I smiled knowing karma had finally arrived. This confrontation wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. Every stare, every whispered comment from neighbors, every inch of authority Karen tried to flaunt, was crumbling before my eyes. And this was only the beginning. A few mornings later, the neighborhood seemed calm, almost deceptively so, with soft sunlight spilling across trimmed lawns. But I knew the calm wouldn't last long. Karen had returned, this time armed with stacks of HOA paperwork and the HOA president by her side. Her strategy was obvious: overwhelm me with rules, intimidate me, and hope I would crumble under the weight of bureaucracy. She stepped onto my driveway, heels clicking assertively, carrying herself like a commander leading troops into battle. I met them at the gate, calm and collected, holding a clipboard of my own with copies of deeds, property maps, and legal records. Karen's eyes narrowed when she saw I was prepared. Her smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. She tried her usual opening salvo, scolding and belittling, wielding HOA rules like a weapon. This tree is a violation. You're obstructing property lines. You need to remove it immediately, she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to seem confident. I listened, nodding politely, then calmly began laying out my evidence. Each statement she made, I countered with facts, survey maps proving the tree was on my land, property deeds showing I owned the land under her house, and even correspondence from past HOA meetings confirming her previous misinterpretations of boundaries. The HOA president shifted uncomfortably beside her, realizing that their strong case was crumbling before their eyes. Neighbors began stepping outside, quietly observing from their porches, peeking from windows, whispering to each other. Their curiosity grew as the tension escalated. Karen's face flushed as she realized that her authority here was fragile enough to shatter under the weight of truth. Her attempts at intimidation were no match for meticulous preparation and legal knowledge. At one point, she snapped, her voice rising in panic. "You're harassing me. You can't just claim my house is on your land," she shouted. I remained calm, letting the words hang in the morning air, before calmly responding, "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm simply asserting ownership over land that is legally mine. Your repeated threats and false claims could actually be considered harassment." Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw fear flash across her eyes. The cops, who had come by earlier to observe the escalating situation, now lingered nearby, watching silently. Their presence alone kept Karen from escalating further, a reminder that her tactics wouldn't work when legality and truth were on the other side. I could sense the tension in the street, neighbors whispering, officers evaluating, Karen desperately searching for a loophole that didn't exist. Minutes stretched, but I remained composed. Every word I spoke, every piece of evidence I displayed, chipped away at her authority. She had built a reputation on fear and control, but the community was watching now, seeing her exposed. Eventually, she backed down, muttering complaints under her breath, realizing her power had evaporated in the presence of undeniable truth. By the time she stormed off, dragging the HOA president with her, the neighborhood had returned to a tentative quiet. The oak tree stood tall and proud, its leaves rustling as if whispering congratulations. I felt a mix of relief, triumph, and anticipation, relief that the immediate confrontation was over, triumph at seeing justice prevail, and anticipation knowing that Karen might attempt a subtler retaliation. But I was ready. Every step, every encounter, had been carefully planned. I knew the battle might not be over completely, yet this confrontation had cemented one truth: intimidation and rules wielded without legality are powerless against knowledge, preparation, and patience. The neighborhood had witnessed the shift in power, and the ripple effect of this confrontation would echo far beyond this single street. A week had passed since the confrontation, and the neighborhood seemed deceptively quiet. The sun rose gently, casting warm light across the street, but I knew this calm was temporary. Karen was not the type to accept defeat quietly. Her calls, whispers, and manipulations were subtle, but I had anticipated her every move. Today, I would ensure that her next attempt would not only fail, it would completely expose her. A notice appeared on my gate, hastily taped, with multiple complaints from HOA members attempting to rally against me. Karen had tried to weaponize the neighborhood, hoping to turn opinion against me, but I was ready. I gathered evidence, recordings of her threats, copies of past complaints, and every document proving my land ownership and the legality of my oak tree. Each piece was a carefully prepared response to her intimidation. By mid-morning, I had arranged a meeting with the local authorities and the HOA board. The sun illuminated the backyard, the oak tree casting a protective shadow, as if it understood the battle that was about to unfold. Karen arrived, clipboard in hand, confident that she could finally prove her authority. Instead, she found herself facing a calm, prepared, and unshakable opponent. I presented the evidence methodically. Each complaint, each accusation, was countered with undeniable proof. Land deeds showed the exact boundaries, legal maps confirmed ownership, and recordings captured her threats in her own words. The HOA board members were visibly stunned. This was no ordinary neighborhood dispute. Karen's smirk faltered, and her voice wavered as she tried to interject, but each attempt was met with facts that she could not dispute. The neighborhood began to gather, curious and tense. Some had previously been too afraid to challenge her, but now they watched in awe as the power dynamics shifted before their eyes. Murmurs of surprise and quiet applause rippled through the crowd. Karen's previous aura of control was dissolving, replaced by awkwardness, frustration, and a dawning realization of her vulnerability. The officers, who had returned to oversee the meeting, nodded subtly at my presentation, their silent presence reinforcing the truth. Karen tried one last desperate attempt, claiming technicalities and procedural loopholes, but each argument collapsed under the weight of documented evidence. Her previous confidence had vanished, replaced by panic that was almost palpable. By the time the meeting concluded, Karen had no choice but to retreat. She left with the HOA president, muttering complaints under her breath, knowing she had been publicly outmaneuvered. The street returned to its peaceful rhythm, but the shift in authority was permanent. The oak tree, once a target of harassment, now stood as a symbol of resilience and quiet victory. Neighbors approached me, sharing whispers of admiration and relief. Some even confided that they had secretly suffered under similar HOA intimidation but were inspired to stand up for themselves now. The morning had revealed not just the truth about the land, the tree, and Karen's overreach, but also the larger lesson: preparation, patience, and unwavering confidence can dismantle even the most entrenched authority. I stood beneath the branches of my oak tree, feeling a sense of triumph mixed with quiet satisfaction. Karen had underestimated the consequences of her manipulation, and the neighborhood had witnessed a rare moment where justice was visible, undeniable, and empowering. The revelation wasn't just about me or the tree, it was about restoring balance, reclaiming control, and showing that intimidation could not stand against truth. As the sun continued to rise, casting light across the leaves, I knew that Karen's attempts at subtle retaliation might continue, but they would never succeed again. The neighborhood had seen, and the lesson had been learned. Ownership, preparation, and courage had prevailed, and the oak tree, a silent witness to the battle, had become the enduring symbol of that victory. It was a quiet morning, with a soft mist hovering over the street and golden light spilling across my backyard. The oak tree, once the center of conflict, swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves whispering stories of resilience. The neighborhood seemed calm, almost serene, but the recent events had left an unmistakable mark. Karen, the once dominant HOA enforcer, had retreated, her influence diminished, and the lesson had been witnessed by every neighbor who had peered through blinds or stepped cautiously onto their porches. I stood beneath the sprawling branches of my tree, sunlight filtering through, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Each knot in the bark, each twist of the branch, felt like a testament to the journey, a symbol of patience, courage, and quiet defiance. The tree had endured threats, intimidation, and the audacity of a woman who believed rules alone could command power. Yet it stood, tall and unshaken, just like I had. Karen's absence was noticeable. The street no longer echoed with her clipped demands or sharp accusations. The HOA had become hesitant, careful in their steps, as they realized their authority had limits against someone prepared and informed. Conversations among neighbors shifted from hushed complaints to cautious admiration. People who had previously stayed silent now nodded in acknowledgement when our paths crossed, some even sharing their own stories of HOA overreach and their newfound resolve to stand up. The officers occasionally passed by, giving a subtle nod or a friendly wave, a quiet acknowledgement of the events that had unfolded. Their presence had been a silent reinforcement throughout the conflict, a reminder that truth, law, and preparation could outweigh intimidation. I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that the confrontation had not only protected my tree but also shifted the balance in our little community. As I walked around the yard, I reflected on the journey. The battle had started with a single threat, a single clipboard-wielding woman demanding the removal of my tree. What followed had been a test of patience, resilience, and strategy. Each encounter had built upon the last, slowly dismantling Karen's perceived authority, until the moment of undeniable revelation when the neighborhood, the HOA board, and even the officers recognized the truth. Neighbors began approaching, quietly at first, then more openly, offering congratulations and words of encouragement. Some shared laughter at Karen's defeat, while others expressed relief at seeing justice served without unnecessary escalation. The air was filled with a sense of communal relief, a reminder that sometimes the most peaceful victories are the most powerful. The oak tree, its roots deep and strong, seemed to mirror the newfound confidence in the neighborhood. It had survived storms, overreach, and intimidation, emerging as a silent guardian of truth and patience. Standing beneath it, I felt a profound connection to the land, the tree, and the journey that had unfolded. This was more than a personal victory, it was a statement that knowledge, preparation, and courage could dismantle control built on fear and false authority. As the morning sunlight danced through the branches, I felt a sense of closure. Karen might attempt to manipulate situations in the future, but she would never reclaim the dominance she once wielded. The neighborhood had witnessed her limits, and the lesson had been learned: intimidation and rules without understanding the law could not stand against patience, strategy, and truth. That tree, once threatened and challenged, now stood as a symbol of resilience, courage, and victory. And beneath its branches, I knew that the battle had ended, not with anger or revenge, but with dignity, calm, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The HOA's power had been checked, my land secured, and the neighborhood had finally seen the strength that comes from standing firmly and wisely for what is right.